Is Generation Z screwed? Let's discuss. Joining us, financial content creator, educator, and author Kyla Scanlon, and professor of economics and public policy at the University of Michigan, a man who cannot believe I said what I just said on television, Justin Wolfers. All right, Kyla, is your generation screwed?
A lot of people are saying that. I mean, I think if you think about it in terms of the traditional economic ladder, it's really shifted. So if you think about graduating college, getting a career, buying a house, getting married, having kids, all of those things are pretty disrupted, and people are trying to find new ways to do it, new ways to make money, new ways to find stability. So if you think that means that they're screwed, maybe, but it just means that the ladder is definitely disrupted.
So when the ladder's disrupted, how do you work around it? Is there hope that there's a fix coming? Because everything's changing so rapidly, and I know you've read the same things I've read, but every other article out there is spelling the end times because AI is going to replace all of us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was a good piece in the Wall Street Journal talking about how a lot of young people are choosing to invest in the stock market rather than buy a house. There's something called aspirational displacement, where people do have extra income. They just can't buy the things that they would traditionally buy on this economic ladder. So they buy things like Labubu and Fartcoin and, of course, the S&P 500. So I think we just see a shift towards that. It's not all doom and gloom. It's just different, and that can oftentimes get painted as doom and gloom.
I wonder if it's just the same thing we always hear about the next generation, because I mean, not too long ago, we were talking about millennials much in the same way. And I think we just showed a HuffPost headline that said the same thing. Are millennials screwed? And the complaints about millennials spending all of their money on avocado toast, much as there are complaints about Gen Z now spending all their money on rotisserie chicken. I actually did see that out there. So is this just overblown, Justin? Is this just part of the cycle of things?
Well, first of all, as an Australian and therefore one of the inventors of avocado toast, I want to defend it stoutly. Any $18 you spend on that creates a better, richer, fuller life, and we're all in favour of it. Look, many of the themes we're talking about, I remember feeling as a young bloke. You know, I always thought that a house was out of reach until accidentally I got a promotion and it was in reach. But I think there's a very real complaint, and a lot of it has to be around housing. There's a generation who grew up and, I'm going to say it to be funny, got rich the old-fashioned way, which is to say sat around, did nothing and watched their house price double. That makes it a lot harder for the next generation to get in. And the real sad part of this is actually bricks are not expensive. Young people can afford bricks. What they can't afford is the dirt on which you'd put those bricks. Now, of course, we have a lot of sky above the dirt, but regulation won't let us build those buildings up. And so a lot of the problems, particularly from the housing side, I think are eminently solvable if only the older generation would get out of the way.
Well, hold on. And first off, I, as a young Sheila, also felt the same way, if we want to speak in Australian terms. But look at this. I want to pull up these numbers from Redfin. They're from 2023, so they're 3 years old, but still. 24-year-olds homeownership by generation. Look at this. Gen Z, 27% own a home. Millennials, 24%. Gen X, 23%. So according to these numbers, Gen Z is doing better, Kyla, on homeownership than my generation was and Justin's generation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those statistics do speak volumes, but I think it's around 80% of the Gen Zers that have bought a home with parental help. So I think that definitely makes a difference in terms of which generation can afford stuff. So like my parents' generation, Gen X, they were able to buy a house with their own income. And of course, they worked really hard for it. But I think now, because of the great wealth transfer from generation to generation, and because parents are supporting their children much later in life than they historically did, younger people have that path to buy a home.
So, Justin, is there reason for optimism? As somebody who's been through, the hard times and has come out on the other side of it, is there a reason for this generation to be optimistic? And again, I'm going to bring up AI because AI is making me certainly less optimistic about the future. And I know I'm old.
Katie, you've got to stop pretending there's a big age gap between you and I. We're very close, very close. Look, two things can be true. People can be struggling because the old scripts look unattainable. The other side is, just as an objective fact, that Gen Z will be the richest generation And Gen Z in the United States will be the richest generation in the richest country in the history of the world. This is a generation, there's no need for this generation ever to need to know what hunger feels like, what want feels like. Now, might be we misdesign our policies in such a way that happens, but there really is tremendous wealth. What there's uncertainty about is where that wealth is going to go. I have no doubt that my kids' generation are going to be enormously wealthier than mine, but will it go to just a couple of people, the AI entrepreneurs who end up owning everything? Or are we going to invent ways in which this revolutionary technology can actually lift us all up and we all get a useful slice of the pie?
That's a good question, one that is not yet answered and is probably unanswerable at this moment. And Kyla, your Substack today was really interesting because you were defining this generation as one. What were the two terms? One of them was nostalgia, and the other one was speculation. Explain those two seemingly divergent paths, but how, as you argue, are actually the same.
Yeah, I mean, it might be a little too much to get into in this short segment, but essentially it feels like everything is very future forward with what we think about with speculation, prediction markets, sports betting, crypto. Like there's a lot of betting going on. And so a lot of people are trying to find financial stability through doing things like that. But there's also a lot of nostalgia. So I found it interesting that most of the Super Bowl ads were very backwards looking. And it just feels like we don't have a story for what the present moment feels like, which I think leads to a lot of these narratives about people not knowing where we are and not knowing what to do about the present moment that we're in. So I think we're primarily being driven by speculation, so very future looking, and then being pulled back into the past, very nostalgic, and not so sure about the present.
Yeah, I did not enjoy being duped by Coinbase, fooled into singing along to Backstreet Boys, which I did, only to find out Coinbase was the ad, and it got a giant groan from the room that I was in. All right, Kyla, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it. Justin, thank you as well.